Welcome to Believing the Word with author and pastor Dan Shunk. This program is a ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Here's what's coming up in today's message.
Tyre was the hub. All of these nations, dozens of countries and dozens of goods listed here as if it's a ship's manifest. Well, why would the Lord take this time to just detail out every part of this? He's making the point that they have reached the pinnacle. They arrived. If they were striving to be the trader of the world, guess what? It worked.
Have you ever been a little too confident in your own abilities or intellect, only to be knocked down a peg or two, or perhaps completely plowed over? It can be humiliating, and in the worst case, devastating. Tyre was wealthy, powerful, and admired by the world, but its success led to arrogance and self-glory. Today in Ezekiel 27 and 28, Ezekiel compares the city to a magnificent ship that suddenly sinks, showing how quickly pride can destroy what seems unstoppable. The message is clear. When people trust in their power, wealth, or reputation more than God, destruction follows. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. God humbles the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Now here's Pastor Dan in the book of Ezekiel as he continues his message, The Downfall of Pride.
Join us in Ezekiel chapter 27 tonight, and Lord willing, we'll be looking at Ezekiel 27 and 28. And in a way, this is the second half of a look at the judgment on the nation state of Tyre. Tyre and Sidon, twin cities in modern-day Lebanon. That's what we're going to be looking at here tonight. So let's remember where we're at in the book of Ezekiel, because it opened up with God calling Ezekiel to a mission in the first 3 chapters. And then we took an extended period of 21 chapters and we looked through the messages that Ezekiel was told to bring to Judah. Judah that was there with him in Babylon, but also Judah that was still back in Jerusalem, because there was more judgment to come against the city of Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. They were going to be yet taken over and conquered. So Israel has a lot to be told to them yet through Ezekiel, and we got a lot of that in chapters 4 through 24. Well, we began the last time we were together this third section of the book in which Ezekiel is now prophesying to the nations, certain nations, foreign nations. Well, which nations? Well, it's the ones that affected Israel. It's the ones that had interactions with Israel, the ones that had dealings with them. That's the ones that he's told to talk to and talk with. When we were in chapter 25, the last time we were together, he actually spoke to 4 different nations there: Ammon, Moab, Edom, and the Philistines. And then we looked at chapter 26, and it was a bit of a message directly at Tyre. So these are all the nations that are directly surrounding Israel back in those days and even today, just with their modern names. And so just don't forget through this here third section of Ezekiel, as we're looking at these foreign nations, why is it important to understand why God says woe to these foreign nations? And we put together a little outline to remember why it's important to think about these messages to foreign nations with that outline, with the outline of woe, W-O-E. And the first reason is because we learn personally. It's for us. The things that they did, the things that they're being punished for or rewarded for, we should learn from those. Bring it straight into our own life. But also because it'll help us to understand the Old Testament better. As you understand these surrounding nations, you begin to see all the Old Testament stories connect together. But then additionally, the E is for eschatology. The study of these foreign nations help us understand their role in the end days. In fact, next time we're together, Lord willing, we'll be looking even at Egypt. And Egypt certainly plays a large role in the end days, particularly in the millennial kingdom to come. So we'll get more of that in these lessons. But here for today, we're looking today at these cities of Tyre and Sidon, which is in the north of Israel. Today, these cities are in the nation of Lebanon. Lots of strife and turmoil still to this day in these areas. But Tyre specifically is the epitome of pride. If you were going to identify different sins by different nations, maybe you'd say that Babylon was idolatry, but you would say Tyre's Tyre represents the sin of pride. And all sins ultimately can go back to pride, of self-exaltation. And so, although we looked at Tyre in chapter 26 the last time we were together, tonight's messages in chapter 27 and 28 actually continue to go deeper into this judgment, this message against the nation of Tyre. In fact, it goes so deep that you're going to see that at one point it completely switches, and the Lord is no longer talking through Ezekiel about Tyre the nation, but about the kingdom of hell. He's no longer talking to the ruler of Tyre. He's now talking to the spiritual ruler of Tyre, Satan himself. Chapter 28, you'll see tonight, is all about Satan himself, the ruler of this world, and his pride. And so, altogether tonight, we're going to look at 4 problems with pride as we have them epitomized here in this city-state of Tyre. Tyre, it's in modern Lebanon today. So as we open up chapter 27, the first one we're going to look at here is that pride will make you focus on what you're good at instead of what matters. Pride will make you focused on something of the earth because you're humanly good at it, rather than focusing on what the Lord wants you to do. You know, sometimes the Lord doesn't always call you to do something that you're really, really good at. Ask Moses. Right? When Moses was called to lead the children of Israel, he's like, but I got this stutter. I can't talk. He's like, I'll help you through this. You know, the Lord doesn't always call us to something that we're wonderful at, but he wants to use us for important things. Well, pride would do the opposite. It would just make you focus on being better and better at some earthly thing. And one day you wake up and you realize that you have the, greatest ping pong ball collection in the world, and nobody cares because your pride was invested in some hobby that doesn't matter. And so let's begin here in chapter 27, verse 1. And it says, "Moreover, the word of Yahweh came to me, saying, Now as for you, son of man, take up a lamentation," or that's a mourning cry, "take up a lamentation over Tyre, and say to Tyre, who inhabits the entrance of the sea," and he'll go on and talk about them as a trader of the peoples of the coastland. So he's going to give them the message starting here at the end of verse 3. But first of all, he addresses the city of Tyre. Well, Tyre was, we mentioned this last time in chapter 26, Tyre was the interchange of all the oceanic nations. Any of the nations around the Mediterranean and beyond, even up to Britannica, which is modern day England, right? All of these nations would flow into Tyre. This was the international trade hub of the waters. Tyre lived and died based on being a merchant and being a trader. Trader, trader, not like, against their own country, but as in exchange. So this whole chapter here is a bit of a mourning cry from the perspective of Tyre becoming a shipwreck. That's the imagery that God gives in this chapter. It's very fitting for a nation like Tyre. We mentioned last time in chapter 26 that if Babylon was known as having the mother of all armies, well, Tyre was known as having the mother of all navies. They had this shipping industry that was second to none and traveled the world through it. So that's who this message is going to go to. And so we begin the Lord's message here at the end of verse 3. And this is what he says to them. "Thus saith Lord Yahweh, O Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty. Your borders are in the heart of the seas. Your builders have perfected your beauty. They have made all your planks of fir trees from Shinar. They have taken a cedar from Lebanon to make a mast for you," like a mast of a ship, right? In verse 6, "Of oaks from Bashan they have made your oars. With ivory they have inlaid your decks of boxwood. From the coasts of Cyprus," which is also known as Chittim. Verse 7, "Your sail was of fine embroidered linen from Egypt, so that it became your standard," or that's your banner, your sign, right? "Your awning was blue and purple from the coastlands of Elisha." This is describing Tyre as if it's this beautiful ship, right? You get the idea? Let's just continue here in verse 8. The inhabitants of Sidon and Arvad were your rowers. Your wise men, O Tyre, were aboard. They were your pilots. In other words, your navigators, right? Verse 9. The elders of Gebal and her wise men were with you, repairing the seams. All the ships of the sea and their sailors were with you in order to deal with all your merchandise. Just 2 more verses. Verse 10. Persia and Lud and Put. So everywhere, Persia we know is Iran, right? That's pretty far into the east from where they're at. Lud and Put, this is like Libya down in Egypt. So pretty far away nations. So Persia, Lud and Put were in your military force, your men of war. They hung shield and helmet in you. They set forth your majesty. And finally in verse 11, the sons of Arvad and your military force were on your walls all around. And the Gemalim were in your towers. They hung their small shields on your walls all around. They perfected your beauty. So here, first of all, it begins with the sin of Tyre. Do you see it already? He's describing this city as a beautiful ship in analogy. That's how he's describing them. Do you see yet the sin that's being laid out here? Well, it's their claim, but going the whole way back to the beginning of this in verse 3, their claim that, O Tyre, you have said, I am perfect in beauty. And then he goes on to talk about them as they would describe themselves in all of their majesty, right? That is the beginning of their problem. Look at me. I am perfect. I have it all. I have everything I need. So God describing Tyre as this ship. In fact, we could break these verses that we just read down kind of into 3 sections. I wonder if you saw it as we were going through. Verse 4 through 7 actually describes the ship itself. Right? It's describing in those verses, the planks of the ship are wonderful. The mast of the ship is wonderful. The standard, banner sign is just this beautiful signage. So it's describing the ship itself. And then we got down to verse 8 and 9. And verse 8 and 9 was describing all of the men of work, all of the people that made this happen. And the wise men that put all this together. And then finally in verse 10 and 11, it describes the men of war and the military forces that would go out on these ships as well. And so it's describing the city as this ship and how beautiful it was with all of the wise men putting it all together. They had the men of work. They had the men of war. They had everything. They had it all. And that's the description that's given to us here. And some people look at this and you say, well, what's wrong with that? They're just striving to do a good work. Well, we already got a hint of where this is going because of verse 3. They look at themselves and they say, I am perfect in beauty. You know what this is like? This is a lot like when David was the king of Israel. And when David finally got a chance to rest, you know what he did? He numbered the people. He took a census of the people because he wanted to know how strong he was and how awesome his military was and how great his nation was. And God said, you don't need to do that. Can I not win by many or by few? What does it matter how many you have? And yet David in his pride wanted to number the people to know how great he was. You see these? Do you still see churches take attendance numbers and all that? You see some of them still post it up on the boards, right? They have the little boards off to the side, or maybe it's in their bulletin now. That's the Lord's work on how those things happen. That's not for us. And cannot the Lord change Chambersburg with a few? He doesn't need thousands to change Chambersburg. He could do it with 10 if he wanted to. That's his business. And so this is the beginning of their problem. Look how great we are. Well, let's go on now and continue to see the Lord's problem with them. We're going to read another large section here, starting in verse 12. He's now going to start talking about all of these countries around that interchanged with them. And so we're going to get many, many nation names here. Starting at verse 12, Tarshish, which is modern Spain. Tarshish was your customer because of the abundance of all kinds of wealth. With silver and iron and tin and lead, they paid for your wares. Javan, Tubal, and Meshech, these are all parts of modern Turkey. They were your traders. With the lives of men and vessels of bronze, they paid for your merchandise. So there we even have forced slavery still, right? Verse 14, those from Beth Togarmah gave horses and war horses and mules for your wares. And then in verse 15, the sons of Dedan, that's a part of modern Saudi Arabia. The sons of Dedan were your traders. Many coastlands were customers at your hand. Ivory tusks and ebony they brought as your payment. Aram was your customer because of the abundance of your goods. That's modern Syria. They paid for your wares with emeralds, pearls, embroidered work, fine linen, coral, and ruby. And then right here in the middle of this list, we have verse 17, Judah and the land of Israel. They were your traders. With the wheat of Minnith, cakes, honey, oil, and balm, they paid for your merchandise. Damascus was your customer, again, a part of Syria. Because of the abundance of your goods, because of the abundance of all kinds of wealth, because of the wine of Helbon and white wool. Also in verse 19, Vidan and Javan paid for your wares from Uzal. Wrought iron and cassia and sweet cane were among your merchandise. Dedan traded with you in saddle clothes for riding. Arabia and all the princes of Kedar, again, parts of Saudi Arabia, they were customers at your hand for lambs and rams and goats. For these, they were your customers. And then verse 22, the traders of Sheba and Ramah, again, these are parts of Arabia, they traded with you. They paid for your wares with the best of all kinds of spices and with all kinds of precious stones and gold. And then look at all these other nations here listed in verse 23. We won't go through all of these, but Haran and Cana, Eden, the traders of Sheba, Asher, and Chilmad traded with you. They traded with you in choice garments, in clothes of blue and embroidered work, and in carpets of many colors and tightly wound cords, which were among your merchandise. Wow, this list. I mean, not only is it a list of all of these foreign nations that traded with them, but it's also the idea is that all of the precious commodities from all over the world and all of these different areas came through this port. Everything. You know, we talk about the Silk Road in China, and you read this in your textbooks in school and stuff, and how we brought product out of the east to the west. Tyre was that of the ancient world. They were the hub where all of the different unique merchandise from all over the world came through this port city of Tyre. It wasn't like that all along the Mediterranean. I think sometimes we have this impression that, well, if you have a coastline, well, you could have a port city anywhere. It really wasn't like that. I mean, Israel had a port city in Joppa, and then you've got this one here in the north at Tyre. You had another one down in Alexandria, Egypt, and that's about it. On this edge of the Mediterranean, that was the only real coastal port cities. And Tyre was the hub. All of these nations, dozens of countries and dozens of goods listed here as if it's a ship's manifest. Well, why would the Lord take this time to just detail out every part of this? He's making the point that they have reached the pinnacle. They arrived. If they were striving to be the trader of the world, guess what? It worked. It worked. And you know, some people get to this point where they arrive. They succeed at the thing they set out to in life. And they say one of three things. You could be like Alexander the Great, and you could say, I've conquered the world. And then die in a drunken stupor in Babylon because you're depressed. That there's nothing left to do. That's one answer. That's one thing people do when they arrive at the pinnacle of success. You could be like Tyre, where you arrive at all of this success and you say, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. There's got to be more. And we'll find there's judgment for them. But there's a third option. There's a really good example in your Bible about a third option. The fisherman Peter. The fisherman Peter, his life's... You know, in those days, if you were a fisherman, you know why you were a fisherman? Do you know why? Because your dad was a fisherman. And his dad was a fisherman. You didn't change occupations. This is what you were. You continued in the family business. That was almost always the case. So he would have watched his dad, his grandfather, his uncles, and others being a fisherman. And finally, one day, Jesus comes along. And have you caught anything? No, nothing. Try your net on this side, right? Come on. We know what we're doing. We've been out here. We're the professional fishermen. My dad was a fisherman. His dad was a fisherman. See, my uncles are still out there. I'm making that part up. You get the point. Okay. And he's like, all right, but at your will, I'll do it. And he catches this enormous catch of fish that he could have never caught on his own, as if the Lord brought him to the pinnacle of success and the greatest catch he could have ever caught. And what's Peter's response? Do you remember in that passage? Do you remember what his response was? He comes immediately after bringing in the fish to the Lord's feet, and he says, depart from me, I am a sinful man. He realized that he's been brought to the height of success of all that his earthly fanfare was all about, and it wasn't fulfilling. It was empty. And he realized the Lord was really what he needed. That is exactly where we should come to when we get to this point where Tyre is. We should say, this is empty. This is not what I thought it was. There's got to be more, Lord. And if you do that, you'll find what Peter found, and you'll come to the Lord. So here in their height of success, now we continue in verse 25, and we're going to see what the Lord does here, starting in verse 25. The ships of Tarshish were the carriers for your merchandise, and you were filled and were very glorious in the heart of the seas. Your rowers have brought you into great waters. The east wind has broken you on the heart of the seas. Your wealth, your wares, your merchandise, your sailors, your pilots, all these things that we've been talking about and describing as wonderful. Your repairers of seams, your dealers of merchandise, and all your men of war who are in you, with all your assembly that is in your midst, will fall into the heart of the seas on the day of your downfall. At the sound of the cry of your pilots, the pasture lands shall shake. So Tyre here pictured as the greatest of traders, doing the greatest of mission with the greatest of merchandise in the greatest of ships on the greatest of water, the greatest possible reward, and they're pictured as sinking. They're sinking, and it just comes to an end. Everything was great until it wasn't. And all of a sudden, you realize one time that there are so many things that are out of our control, that are above our control, that are beyond our means, like the waves of the ocean. And just about the time you think, I have conquered this place, a wave sweeps in and takes you out. We think we're so great until all of a sudden there's a realization that we're not. You know, so many people that have experienced traumatic trauma in life, and that's what it took to humble them, to bring them down from a place of, I have everything. Wait till we get to the book of Daniel coming up soon. In the midst of the book of Daniel, we're going to see Nebuchadnezzar humbled, and he actually responds to the Lord because of it. And Tyre here will not have any longer a chance to respond. So, yeah, I just think of it this way, like the most skilled of parachutists can still die on the next try, right? Yeah, I've got a handle on this gravity thing until you don't. You know, the smartest of pilots can still die on the next flight, even if they think they got their hand on. The strongest of swimmers can still die on the next swim. We think we have such a control on this universe until God just says, poof, not this time, not this time. You thought you were so great until it's over. We just seem to have the control over the awesome power of God's creation until we don't. Until God says, well, let me show you what it can really do. What a reminder that every moment of life just depends on God to sustain us, right? I mean, don't let that scare you by hearing these things. Let it say to you, I need God's favor. I want God's favor. I could go out tonight and have a bolt of lightning strike me. I have no idea, right? I need God's favor. We don't need this world's wealth. We don't need to conquer this world's affairs. We need God's favor in the affairs of this world. That's what we need, especially when we think we're getting to that place where we've mastered something. that's the moment that we actually need to realize I need the Lord. I need the Lord's favor.
You've been listening to Believing the Word, a ministry of author and pastor Dan Shunk at Calvary Chapel Chambersburg in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. Pastor Dan has been teaching through a series in the book of Ezekiel. We'd love to get connected with you and hear about how God is working in your life through this teaching program. You can reach us by phone at 717-500-1102. Again, that number is 717-500-1102. You can also check us out at our website at ccchambersburg.org, where you can learn more about the ministry of Calvary Chapel Chambersburg and find our chapter-by-chapter messages. If you're in the Chambersburg area, we'd love to have you join us Sunday mornings and Thursday evenings on 5121 Coffee Avenue. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back with more from the book of Ezekiel. But until then, this has been Believing the Word with Pastor Dan Shunk.